Welcome to my show, When Everyone Wins, where a key goal I have for you is shifting from power over and under to power within and between. I'm your host, Judy Ryan. In each episode, I'll share my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWork Systems. I'll help you build trust and emotional and social intelligence. My show, When Everyone Wins, is about creating a life you love and helping others do the same. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. It's called Transforming Fear into a Happy Life and Healthy Relationships. I'm excited to bring an amazing and very important guest on my show today. But before I introduce her, I want to connect the dots as to why she's so vital to my intention for this show, When Everyone Wins. I'm someone who, like many other people, has struggled a lot of my life with anxiety, which at times has been severe and debilitating to an extreme. So I know how important this conversation is going to be for many people. My level of fear and anxiety at times has been so huge that it caused me tremendous disengagement, discouragement, and very dark depression. It was so bad at one point in my life that I was actually agoraphobic. I was afraid to leave my house. So I know the power of this guest and how her work is directly related to the intent of my show, When Everyone Wins. Here's the simple truth. We can't create a world where everyone wins or shift the use of our power from power over to power under. From power over or power under to power within and power between, which includes using our power for one another if we're crippled by fear and the self-doubt and the limiting beliefs that fuel that self-doubt. I know in my deepest core that we're afraid of our power and our ways of operating because for many of us, maybe all of us, our power has been shamed or we have been shamed, judged, suppressed, and punished for really just being who we are. Because of this, fear throws many of us, I'd say most of us, into protection. And when this happens, we fail to be present or in touch with our deepest wisdom, and we become unavailable to be helpful in the face of all the needs for our love and attention. And when we're debilitated by fear, we can't serve ourselves and we can't serve one another. My guest has an incredible TED Talk and some really important books that we'll talk about in this interview. She's a fearless woman who's helping many people by sharing her own struggles with fear and the history of her specific family trauma. In her TED Talk, which I strongly encourage you to go and find and watch, my guest shares that when we're afraid, we become hypervigilant, hyperactive, obsessive, physically, mentally, and spiritually unwell, and we experience those attention deficits. We go into fight or flight, and we become unable to be present or purposeful or contributing, and I can vouch for this. In her TED Talk, my guest says we must hold a vision that pulls us past our fear. And when that vision feels unhelpful or elusive, we must choose faith and courage, and these must be followed by new ways of thinking and acting that move us beyond fear. These are the very things that I'm using. I say this in present tense because even doing this live show right now is me acting despite my fear. I'm doing this now and in other aspects of my life because I pray and I focus on my purpose and vision to create a world where everyone loves their life, where everyone reclaims their power and uses it to help everyone win. So with all that being said, let me more formally introduce you to this very special guest of mine. Meet Jacqueline Wales. Jacqueline is a passionate champion for being fearless and a powerful leader in transformational change. She helps reframe fear from being an enemy to vanquish into an untapped superpower. I love that, Jacqueline. I heard Jacqueline speak at an event put on by the Global Impact Network in which we both presented. I don't even really remember the theme of the event, but what I do remember is that I was so impressed with Jacqueline because she shared what fear has done in her own life and more importantly, how she overcame it. She helped those of us listening to know what fear does to the body, the mind, and our ability to or inability to function and to be happy. Because Jacqueline became determined to help as many people as possible to overcome fear and to create a happy life and healthy relationships, she's been out front with many critical and much needed accomplishments. Jacqueline is an author of some incredible books that you won't be able to put down. She sent me some of them, by the way, so I can personally confirm this. Her books include The Fearless Factor, The Fearless Factor at Work, and When the Crow Sings. This last one is an absolutely riveting novel about 3 generations of her Scottish ancestors, especially the women who had to overcome incredible trauma and poverty. If you don't believe me, read all the reviews on Amazon, and you'll hear person after person describe the truth of what I'm saying. Jacqueline just told me she has a new book coming out called Unleash the Power of Fear: How Fear is Your Greatest Ally in Life and Leadership. And we will hopefully be talking about this in our time together. Jacqueline is also a public speaker in lots of places, including the very authentic and thought-provoking TED Talk that I mentioned. She's also the founder of Transformational Strategies for Success, where she provides programs, and she's a trusted advisor to many senior executives who are ready to transform their personal and professional lives. Most importantly, Jacqueline Wales is a walking, talking, living, and deeply contributing example of all that she speaks and writes about. What could be better than a powerful woman leader role model with a calling to support many people in overcoming fear to create a happy life and happy relationships? We desperately need Jacqueline and all that she demonstrates at this time in our history. And with all of that being said, welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Wow, wow, wow. That was quite an introduction, Judy. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story as well. Excuse me. Um, this is my passion. This is my life calling at this point in time, and we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go forward. But if anyone had said to me 30 years ago, this is where I would be, this is what I would be talking about, I would have gone, yeah, not so much.
I'm so glad you followed that thread of your life to where it's brought you.
Indeed.
In one of the books that you wrote that I was reading, I remember you saying, that the people that helped you in your writing at times were people that wanted to know what about your story matters. And I want you to explain in your own words, if you're willing, what are some of the stories of your life and why are you telling them? Because I do think they are so powerful, Jacqueline, but I want my audience to hear that.
So here's the thing. There are more unhappy families than happy families. I mean, the majority of people grow up in what's called dysfunctional households. And it's primarily because the people that raised us didn't know any better. They themselves were raised in a negative fashion and, perhaps not getting the support and love that they needed. And it becomes a perpetuating cycle. We talk about generational traumas, and that's a very real thing. And when we go back through the history of families, through the generations, you can see the same patterns erupting over and over again, which is why I wrote When the Crow Sings, because I had looked at the family dynamics of children born outside of marriage. And this is really one of the big pieces for me. And I saw that my grandmother had 2 children before she married her first husband. She had 3 of them. I don't know what she was feeding them, but they all died before she did. So there we go. Then my mother had 2 children before she had me and married my father. And then I ended up with a child I gave up for adoption. So I was looking at all of those aspects and thinking to myself, where's the generational thread that ties this together? And it has to do with violence. It has to do with emotional abuse. It has to do with poverty and abandonment and the general malaise that afflicts people, generally speaking, working class people. It afflicts every type of culture, frankly, but in my case, it was that. So I like to say I've been dealing with fear for 70 years. I'm 73 years old. So that is exactly where we're at right now. 70 years of dealing with fear. Why? Because my father was a violent alcoholic man who would come home in a rage, and he would find ways to exhibit that rage on his family, on his wife, first of all, and then on his kids. I was the eldest. I took the brunt of it. So I was raised with a lot of that negative, violent, emotional, you're not worth a thing mentality. I left home at 16 because I was basically tired of it. I wanted out of it, and I did not want to keep living that life. 20 years old, I gave birth to my first child. At 20 years old, I'm told the world needs babies. You need to give the child up for adoption. Well, I didn't want the child in the first place, but they refused me an abortion. So I was like, okay, you're stuck with it. When I gave birth, I couldn't give her up. And for 3 months, I had her at this place I was living at. One night, I decided that after I'd been in a rage and I felt like I was ready to do some damage, I had to give her up. So I did. I gave her up for adoption. But then I ran straight into a marriage. And within a couple of years, I gave birth to another child, who, by the way, just turned 50 on Friday, which just blows my mind. It's like, how the hell can that be? 50 years? Excuse me. So anyway, 23, I give birth to him, but I walk out on them when he's 3 years old and I leave for San Francisco. My whole life has been about taking risks, of going where most people would go, I'm not going there, don't have enough money, don't have a job, don't have any way of supporting myself. This has been a theme. So I leave my husband and my child behind in London, because by now I've gone from Edinburgh, Scotland to London. Now I moved to San Francisco. No job, no visa, no nothing, very little money. And I got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fear was very much a piece of it, because tied into all of that, drugs, alcohol, totally out of my mind most of the time. I got a degree at college because I went back to school. Having left school at 15, I went back to school at 21. I ended up with a degree by the skin of my teeth, as I like to say. But it didn't really matter, because in the time I got divorced and I left my kid and I moved to San Francisco. It amounted to nothing. Talk about people who live very linear lives. I lived a very kind of horizontal life. Most people go vertical, jobs, family, blah, blah, blah. I went vertical. I mean, horizontal. So the point being is that I was in my mid-30s, pregnant for the third time, now with my current partner and husband, who I've been with for 45 years. I'm pregnant for the third time, and I decide I've got to get my shit together.
Yeah.
And that began the journey of understanding what fear does. So that's the long story of the background.
Jacqueline, just a couple of things that come to mind as you're telling the story is, even though you lived in some ways what people would consider sort of an adventurous, fearless, you called it a horizontal, a broader experience of life, you were still kind of in that protection and running through the drugs, through the alcohol, through the abandonment. And all of that was your way of trying to avoid probably that pain that was going on inside of you from, I love your TED Talk because it opens with a picture of somebody hiding in that cabinet. And really your life was just a different expression of hiding in a way. I'm on a hide by moving along. And I also want to mention that a lot of people can relate to the kind of violence that you had with an alcoholic father who terrorized the family and all of that, and what that says, even if the words weren't there that you don't matter, the behavior there was there of you don't matter. And also there's degrees, because I know that I got married at 19 and I had my first child at 20, and all those things that we do when we don't even know we're in avoidance. And it wasn't with the extreme trauma you had, but it still was with trauma. And it was so I say that because I know the kind of trauma you're describing is all too common. But trauma is trauma, and it can wreak havoc on your sense of self and your ability to be functional and available to love and to wisdom, no matter how it came about. And so sometimes it's harder for people that say, well, I wasn't beaten and I wasn't in an alcoholic childhood. But most of us have come from somebody who has. Like my mother was a child of an alcoholic who was violent. So, it's just passed through.
It is passed through, and it's passed through in a way that is very difficult for a lot of people to understand. Excuse me 1 second. I'm going to mute myself because I have to clear my throat. So hold on one. Thank you. That's better. So the way that I look at it right now, the degrees of trauma are really not that important. The fact is that trauma leaves its impact. It leaves an impact on us physically. The first massage I ever had, the woman put her hands on my back, and she said, "My God, your back feels like an armadillo." Now, why? Because I was in self-protective mode my entire life. I suffered from chronic asthma when I was a child, so I was constantly in trouble, bronchitis, being sent to hospitals. In those days, they didn't have inhalers, so you had to find drugs to quieten the bronchioles down. So I spent a lot of time in hospitals. I loved my time in hospitals. Why? Because it was ordered, it was clean, it was structured. I knew exactly where things were at when it came to,
Yes,
what was going on. So going into hospital was like, yeah, this is great. I get presents. Somebody brings me fruit and juice and takes care of
yes,
me. That is trauma right
yes,
there.
yes,
So, I mean, at this point in my life, I'm an extremely healthy individual. So I'm very blessed in that way. But the point that I'm making here is that fear is created in our traumas, and it creates belief systems. It creates a sense of not being enough, of not being valued, of not deserving, of not being capable. There's all these knots that I am not that become a picture of who your self-identity is.
yeah,
And that's what makes for the anxieties. That's what makes for the lack of ambition. That's what makes for not taking enough risks or taking stupid risks. I took tons of stupid risks in my life. Was that being fearless? No, that was being stupid most of the time because my fear brain was in flight. I mean, when you're constantly in, and I've talked about this in my new book a lot, the neuroscience of fear is very, very clear. Fear is a hormonal reaction. It's the fight or flight amygdala that kicks in, that tells you there's a threat. The threat then gets connected to your sympathetic nervous system and then into other parts of your brains, the hormones, the catecholamines they're called, which is the adrenaline and the norepinephrine and so forth, and cortisol. Now, when all of that is rushing at you, that's an emotion. That's a powerful emotion. What do we need to do with that? We need to put a story to it. What am I afraid of? Well, frequently we don't really know what we're afraid of.
mhm,
And many times we're afraid of ourselves, to be
yes,
perfectly honest with you.
yes.
It's like, wow, can I really do this? Am I really capable of that? When I threw my child down on that bed when she was 3 months old, I knew I was capable of some serious damage. And I looked at that child who was screaming and I thought, this can't be. I can't do this. So if I looked at that as my first fearless moment, if you like, that was the moment of, no, you need somebody else to take care of you because I'm
Right.
not going to do a good
was
job of this.
it was actually a very powerful act of love because you had enough self-awareness to know that you were not good for this child the way your father was not good for you.
Yeah.
I want to comment on a couple things you just talked about. One is when you talked about the peace that came with being in the hospital. I know my mother, who was a child of a very unpredictable alcoholic. When he was sober, he was as good as gold. When he was drunk, they would lose their home. There was a threat of, somebody being killed, really crazy. And her way, which I think a lot of people do without realizing it, was to latch on to something that felt like a stability. For you, it was the hospital. For her, it was the Catholic Church, the Republican, certain kind of politics, and it becomes almost like extremism, whether it's getting sick to go in the hospital or getting, involved in certain things and holding on to them with a death grip. But also when you talked about asthma, it's really interesting. I have a friend who has been suffering all of her life from pretty severe asthma, the kind that almost sounds like she's going to choke, when she's in front of you.
Mhm.
And one day she was talking about something that was going on with her asthma, and I asked her a question about, like, what would you say if you were able to say whatever you wanted about situations in your life that could be why you get asthma attacks. I don't know how I knew it, but she ended up being able to speak out loud. I don't know if I can ever forgive my husband for this thing. And for the next week she had no asthma, and then the next time we were together and she had asthma, she was talking about a coworker that she was feeling really, really strong feelings toward. And I said, "Do you hate that coworker?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't hate anybody." And I go, "Well, why don't you just practice saying, 'I hate that coworker?'" And her asthma attack completely halted. And so what happened over time was she recognized that her unspoken trauma of something And her fear of herself, like you're describing, afraid of what if I'm this unforgiving person that's hating this person, or is, not the kind of person I've been told I have to be acceptable, was actually fueling her asthma attacks. She now makes the connection between those two. But I don't think most people do with their unwellness and the places in which they go into dysfunction. They don't really make that connection to,
Well,
oh,
what you're speaking to here, Judy, is very clear. It is the mind-body connection. And people seem to think that they can cure everything with the mind. Well, I'm sorry, you can't. You've got to get into the body. I mean, I have to tell you, from the age of 35 onwards, I started doing some really intense body work. And I mean, intense, like, we talk about rolfing and we talk about, going into the deep, deep tissue stuff that would have me screaming on the table and crying and releasing all the somatic stuff that was held within the cellular level of the body. Because most of us are operating at a subconscious level. We're
yes.
not talking about, rational thoughts for the most part. And what happens with that flood of energy that comes from our brain, it ends up in our body. So yes, when that massage therapist said my back was like an armadillo, well, I would constantly be punched and battered by my father, and mostly on my back because I would curl up in a fetal position trying to avoid his fists. My father was a dock worker, built like a bodybuilder. So that tells you, and there's a lot of muscle behind that thing. So it was no surprise that my body shut down.
Mhm.
And the asthma, of course, growing up in that kind of household, yeah, no question about it. Plus, they were heavy smokers and, small house, thick with nicotine, you name it. But the point being is that the body has to be acknowledged. You have to be able to check in with your body to see what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, I just listened to a talk by Gary Zukav, who you may be familiar with, and he talks about
Mhm.
how our intuition, our deepest intuition, is sinking into the body. And it made me think of my friend with the asthma, but also myself. And the reason that we must tap into the intuition of the body is because our mind tries to override what's occurring. It's overriding what has occurred, what is occurring. You said in your TED talk that only 15% of the population is even self-aware because we're terrified to be self-aware. We don't know what to do with if we don't have the right support or the right information about what has happened to us. That's why I really believe that trauma informed is very important. And a lot of people, that sounds so dramatic, but trauma informed just means recognize that the vast majority of people have had something happen in their lives that has caused them to go into like a pretty extreme version of struggle within themselves. And it shows up in the body. And that's why I think it's so important for people to get back to the body, like you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean that thing that the piece of it is to your point about self-awareness, and I see this in the people I work with and have worked with. People want to change, but they don't want to change
Yes.
because they want to change easily. And what I like to say is, in this kind of work, there's no such thing as easy.
No.
You have to do the deep work of hold up a mirror, check it out, find out what it is that's really getting in your way. Where's your resistance?
Mm-hmm.
What are the patterns that have been impacting you for all of your life? And what do you want to do about it?
Yes.
So if you are willing to take the journey, and it's a hard journey, no question about it. I've done 30 years of personal development work, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you the tools that I've created for people, if they're willing to show up and do the work,
Mm-hmm.
6 months, I'll have you through that business.
Well, and Jacqueline, I think if more people did the work wouldn't be quite as difficult because I know in my work, I go into whole organizations and change the community structures and strategies and tools and support. Because if you have the right support, I think you're right. Most people do want to be good. They want to wake up. They want to be self-aware. They want to be self-managing, but they only want to if they feel safe enough. And if they don't feel safe enough, they're going to choose protection all the time.
So here's the thing about safety, and I mentioned this in my talk as well. Safety is an illusion.
Yes.
I mean, why are people who are traumatized become control freaks? And God knows, I call myself a recovering control freak. My family still says you're still a control freak. So what can I say? But it's a safety issue.
Yes.
Because if I can control everybody and everything around me, then I'm fine. I'm fine. But again, it's an illusion because
Yes.
everything can be taken away from you in a heartbeat. I mean, I've lived through earthquakes and I've been close to having fires destroy my home like it did in Los Angeles. In fact, the area of Los Angeles that burned down the Palisades, I lived through one of those because I was living in the Palisades. But fortunately, my house stood still. And according to what I was seeing, the house is still there, which is amazing. But the point that I'm making here is that everything changes in a heartbeat. The only thing that's guaranteed in life, uncertainty,
Right.
uncertainty.
Right.
But
And
it's the uncertainty that makes us resistant to change.
yes. And, I always tell people that I work with, discomfort is not the enemy.
No, you have
It's
to be comfortable getting uncomfortable
yes.
if you're to make the changes.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be excruciating all the time either. It's uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be, it's not going to cause you the death that you're afraid it's going to cause you. The other thing that I love about what you just said about safety being an illusion. I also think this notion that we have to make sure we can trust other people is an illusion. It doesn't mean we don't pay attention to the cues that say this person is unsafe and I'm going to avoid them. I don't mean that. I'm saying that the real question about trust and safety is, have I learned to commit to and believe in my own capability of handling whatever comes? That way, if I'm in the face of somebody who's untrustworthy, I don't avoid it. I don't avoid it instantly. I don't avoid it. Where most people will go through being with somebody untrustworthy 10 times before they finally speak up.
I know, because they don't trust
They
themselves.
don't trust themselves.
And this
Yeah.
is, I mean, I have a whole program on trust. And it's basically if you don't know how to trust yourself, you can't trust other people.
Right. Right. And
It's a
so,
key,
so
key
you,
piece.
instead of saying, can I trust others? Your question should constantly be, can I trust myself? Am I safe with myself? And I love that about everything you're doing, because if people stop making it about what's out there anymore, they'll be willing to start going in here, I think.
So let's talk about blame. That's
Yeah.
a big issue right there. I want to blame other people. I want to blame circumstances. I want to blame my parents. I
Yes.
want to blame the fact that I don't have any money. I
Mm-hmm.
want to blame all kinds of ways. Well, what is blame? It's
Mm-hmm.
shifting the focus from you to someone else. I am the victim. When I am in blame mode, I'm the victim of whatever it is. Well, I like to say, are you a victim or are you a thriver?
Yes.
Now, I like to say I'm a surthriver because not only have I survived my childhood, and by the way, I have changed the dynamics of what a family looks like in one generation because I did my work.
You did.
So my kids have a much better way of leading their lives forward in their histories without the heavy load
Yes.
baggage
Yes.
that I brought with mine.
Yeah.
So there is a piece here, but the point I'm making here is you can play the victim, you can blame other people, circumstances, whatever, but where are you taking responsibility for
Yes.
yourself?
Yes. Well,
And
it's ironic, Jacqueline, and you can tell me what your thoughts on this are. Literally, you were a victim. As a child, you
yeah,
were a victim. Like, there's no shame in saying I was victimized. But the point of
absolutely.
it is, at some point, you said, I am no longer going to focus there. I'm going to focus on, how do I pick up my own power? How do I reclaim it? How do I start becoming responsible? That's what I think is the thing most people don't want to focus on. Is that idea that I can put the blame down, but then I'm picking up the responsibility or not.
So this brings us back to self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say I've used the analogy of standing in your own shoes. You're not standing in somebody else's shoes, you're standing in your own shoes.
Yes.
So self-awareness is about I accept responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I accept that these are strengths and these are weaknesses. And yes, I've got blind spots. The thing of this is, and you know this as well as I do, none of us gets to be better on our own. You
Right.
can listen to this podcast, you can listen to what I have to say, you can listen to this conversation, you can sit there and go, yeah, I get it. and I need to work on that. You won't do it alone. You won't
No.
do it alone. And it won't do just reading books, because reading books will get you so far. You got to find somebody who will hold up a mirror and tell you what it is you need to hear, or at least allow you to show yourself what it is that you need to hear in order for you to heal.
Yeah, or even what do you need to say in order to build your courage, and you need somebody to be there to hear it. Which leads me to this question, Jacqueline. Can you tell us any of the success stories you've actually been part of creating for your clients? Because, it's easy in a way to talk about fear from that place of trauma and all of that, but you have worked with people who have said yes to the hard work. Can you share any of those success stories with the
I
audience?
absolutely can. My favorite story is working with one woman who was on my transformational strategies program. She started out with a lot of fear, a lot of fear about who she was, how she was doing her job, her relationship with her husband, with her kids, and especially with her mother. Her mother was on the phone with her every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning and would always on and on about the victim mentality. Her mother was definitely a problem. And then she would call her up several times during the day, and it was getting to her. And she knew that she hadn't been dealing with it properly. She would be answering her mother would be pulling her down, she would never be able to step up to her. After a couple of months of us working together, she told her mother one morning to F off. And her mother was absolutely flabbergasted.
Yeah.
You told me to F off? Yes. Go away, mother. Do not call me. I will call you when I need to speak to you. Now, this had been a pattern that had gone on for decades.
Mhm.
So this was a huge piece for her.
Mhm.
And over the next few weeks, it became clear that she was separating herself from her mother in a significant way, because she had learned to control her own fear around what it would do to her mother or
Mhm.
what her mother would say to her.
Mhm.
Because she started to care less about what her mother was thinking about her and caring more about what was happening to her. The other thing she said to me was, I have cried every day for 20 years. Every day for 20 years. Since I started this program, I haven't cried once.
That's a beautiful story. Oh my gosh. I will say, and maybe this is just my own reaction to your story, there are instances where we do need to say F off. But
Yeah.
there are also instances where we don't, but we still need to set that guideline. I don't like to even word the boundaries because it always feels a little bit, I don't know, victimy in a way. But I do think there are times where we say, what am I feeling and what do I want and what will I stand for? And it may just be that in your heart of hearts, you say to that person, I don't want to hear all this negativity all the time. Can we change the subject? Or tell yourself, I'm only going to take a call from my mother once a week, or whatever it is that you can live with. Because I know that is also part of reclaiming our power. I love it that her story was so abusive that she cried every day. Of course, she needed to do it that strongly. But sometimes it's just simply being aware of, what do I actually want? And like you said, not only was she afraid of hurting her mother, but what her mother would do to her. That's going on in a lot of people. They're
I
so,
know it is, and then that's really the tragedy of it. Again, you have this kind of messed up relationship between parents and children. I mean, I wasn't the best parent. In fact, I just spoke with my 30, now 37, almost 38-year-old. And I said to them, they are non-binary, so they're they, them. And I said to them, when you were a small child, I was in the throes of some of my deepest therapy, of really coming to terms with my dark shadow side and all the ramifications of my early upbringing and my drugs and my alcohol and so on and so forth, and leaving children behind. I mean, God knows I ran the gamut of all of that. I said, and when you were born, you came at a time when I had decided that I was going to clean this mess up. I was in AA for 5 years before I realized it wasn't about the drinking, it was about the thinking. Now,
yes.
that tells you something right there. But anyways, at the age of almost 38, I said to them, you got the worst of me when you were a little child. I said, but now you have a child. She just turned 2 yesterday. I said, now you get the best of me.
Mm-hmm.
Now you get the best of me.
Yeah.
And
And
she got it.
I think that's a really beautiful thing for you to say to the audience, because we're all in process. And those of us who are the healers are often those wounded healers. And we put this pressure on ourselves, like, as soon as I understand something, I have to be the perfect mother. That's not true. That doesn't mean you still don't have to clear and shift so much of your past. And that's what I'm hearing in your story. You were able to say to your now 38-year-old, this is what you got from me, the good and the bad of it. And now you're going to get even better from me because I can own that up to you. I can tell you that was what was going on. It was never about you, which leads me to another question that I think you're uniquely qualified to answer is, because things do start in childhood. And the sooner we can start to shift how we do it in childhood or in education, or even when we encounter people in the workplace that are kind of in that repressive, trauma-based child behavior and thinking, what advice would you give for the awareness that you've gained to these people that are responsible for leading little kids or adults that are still in little kid mode?
This is a bit of a tricky situation because, again, it's going to come back to self-awareness. How aware are you that your generational trauma or your early childhood trauma is influencing how you're showing up today? Are you managing to bring your best self to everything you do, or are you making excuses for your existence? Too many people make excuses for their existence. I was speaking with someone at the birthday party yesterday, going unnamed, but all I heard was complaints about other people. And I knew that this person wasn't really willing to look at their own stuff. And that if it was a matter of taking some time to say, okay, this is how you feel about other people. Can we talk about how you really feel? And this is someone who has not a great marriage. It's a tolerant marriage. And unfortunately, the offspring have their own issues around that one too. And I hear those stories and I talk to those people, and I desperately want to say, can we just really get down into what matters to you? So to your point, and this is someone who was a teacher, by the way. So she brought her best as a teacher to the students that she worked with. I have no doubt about it. She's a very caring individual, very generous individual. But the point that I'm making here is that we can only help those people if they're willing to help themselves. And that's the sad part of it.
I think that's what was so powerful when I heard your statistic about only 15% of the population is self-aware, because no matter what your role is in an organization or a family or a school or whatever, most of us have somebody that we're influencing. And if we're not self-aware, we are raining upon one another these power over power under dynamics that are part of the tagline of my program. And I think that's the hard part, because people don't want to look at their power and how they're using it. And it's interesting because you talked about leaders who are blaming or complaining. What I see in a lot of leaders, whether they're parent, maybe that's because my own parents were this way, is that grip on certainty. I know I'm right and you're wrong.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember even my parents, they were so radical in their Catholicism, they got upset when Vatican II came along to change so the nuns didn't have to wear habits. For those of the listeners that are Catholic, when people are certain, and a lot of people that rise to leadership, it's because they're perceived as confident and certain. They're they're on that border of, I'm going to constantly do power over you, whether it's real abusive or whether it's just through judgment or manipulating people with dangling carrots or whatever it is. Can you speak to that when you work with those leaders?
When you have leaders who insist on having control, who want to be seen as the power merchants, shall we say, I'm in charge.
Mm-hmm.
You do as I say, not as I do, just do as I say. I'll tell you what to do. There's no collaboration there. There's no sense of we're in this together. And again, we come back to that issue of safety.
Mhm.
I maintain my position and I'm the boss. You're the person who does the work. Do not question me because I know I'm right, because
Yeah,
I'm the boss.
yeah,
That point of view is becoming like the dinosaur. It has to go away, and it is going away slowly, slowly, because we live in a much better world, frankly. But the point that I would say about that is, excuse me, I'm having some real throat problems today. Um, the point that I'd like to make about that is very simply this. These individuals need to hang on to their status and their power. They exclude everyone else in the process.
yes,
Even at home, they probably have, if it's a man, it's a wife who does everything else. And
yes,
they do their thing. How do we break through that mentality? That becomes the bigger question. How do
yes,
you break through that mentality? You have to get down into what is your greatest fear.
yes. And I would say almost without exception, most leaders, not all, but the vast majority of leaders are coming from that place of I have to be in control because I am so afraid. And they don't
Right.
have a conscious awareness of it at all.
That's exactly right. And that's why I will always start with my leaders. What's your greatest fear? And here's what they tell me 9 times out of 10, the fear of failure. Now, I have my own take on failure, and this is an important subject because a lot of people have this fear of failure. What is failure? It's something that didn't work out. That's it. It's an expectation, a choice, or a decision that did not go the way you had planned. What do? You make a different choice. You
Mhm.
make a different decision. Most of the time, it's not life-threatening. Most of the time, it might impact your bank account if it goes that way. And one of the stories I tell in my new book is that in 2008, I lost over $3 million in the Lehman Brothers debacle. And I had to revise and redefine my entire life at that point in time. Not many people have to go through that kind of financial trauma, but it was a failure. It was a failure because we weren't paying enough attention. It was a failure because we had given it to somebody who didn't really know what they were doing with the money. There was a lot of failure around that particular issue. Did
Yeah.
it kill us? No.
To your point on that is we fail and succeed in community. So you're not, it's so interesting because you're not saying they did it. You're saying I wasn't paying attention too. I wasn't, I had to learn something.
Yes.
And so, but it is within a community context. And, and so let me ask you this. When you ask these executive leaders that you work with, what is your greatest fear? Is that something that takes them a while to finally own? Or is it something that they deny? Or what is your typical?
No, but generally they'll go to the easy ones, the fear of loss, the fear of humiliation, the fear of rejection, the fear of failure. The fear of failure is the easy one, frankly. Yeah, my business might fail. I might fail as a leader. Yeah, you might actually succeed, because here's the other thing about fear. Fear is predicated on something that's going to happen out there a
Mhm,
lot of the time. It's catastrophizing.
mhm,
It's about the projection of worst case scenarios.
mhm.
And then we look back on the past and we go, well, oh, that should happen before. So yes, it could very well happen again. Okay. What about this present moment?
Mhm.
Now, you mentioned Anthony DeMello before we got started on this call today, who's no longer with us, but was an amazing spiritual teacher from India, which surprised me because I thought with the name of DeMello, he came from Italy, but there we are. To the point that I'm making here is that when we are focused on the present, when we realize that the gift of the moment, this is our only reality
Mhm.
right now. This conversation we're having, what we said 5 minutes ago, until we read it or hear it or whatever. We have no idea what was said. I could not repeat it. In fact, I'm often asked, can you repeat what you just said? And I go, no, if you didn't catch it first time, it's gone. It'll come back in another version. There you go. But the point I'm making here is that the gift of the moment, the present moment, is really where we are focused and where our brains work at their best. Like,
Yeah.
multitasking is very bad for the brain. It takes you 20 minutes to come back into focus again. I'm a writer, so I love to write and I love to be in that process, but take me out of it, I'll probably go off and do something else. I won't come back to it again. But the point I'm making here about fear is get out of that catastrophizing. If you're going to think about the future, think about what can be possible. Think about all the good things that might happen. Yes, right this moment might feel like shit. And certainly, if we're looking at the moment we're recording this right now, this country is in a deep, deep mess, frankly. And there's a lot of businesses that are absolutely steering, they're holding back, they're uncertain, they're not spending any money. They're definitely not looking for a lot of services like mine, for instance, although this is probably a time they need me more than ever.
More than ever.
But they won't, because it's like resistance. We don't know where things are going. So that uncertainty leads to, well, down the road, we may have bad business, we may have no money, we may have blah, 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 I'll be out of a job. God knows we can all go there. It doesn't take 2 minutes to go there. But the truth of the matter is, I insist that we stay here right now. What do you have for today? What's going on today? And
Yeah.
what action are you taking for tomorrow? And that becomes a real key driver there. What's going on for you today that you can take action on to make tomorrow better?
Yeah. And Jacqueline, just sharing this, I study a lot of things that help me remember my power and remember the good and remember my ability to affect. And so when I wake up in the morning, and this might be something that could help the listeners as well, is to be in the present moment. I'll say things like, it's going to be a great day today. And I'll say things like, I am the predominant creative force in my life. I'm not the only force in my life, but I'm the predominant one. That's how powerful I am. And I'm vital and healthy. And I am living my true nature and my purpose. And when I say those things, I feel like, I'm on top of the world in a good way, in a healthy way. And then what happens is when we are present, I feel like I can be with somebody in a way that can help them come to the present. I remember recently one of my consultants said to me, I'm afraid to accept your help because I'm afraid you're going to discover who I really am and not like me so much. And I think she wanted me, or at least a lot of times a leader will say, oh, but you're so wonderful. And I didn't. And I said, well, who gives a shit what I think of you? And she just started laughing because I think that is what people need to know is it's what you think of you. But I couldn't have said that in the present moment if I wasn't aware of my power and her beauty and her goodness. I couldn't have gotten there. I would have felt like, oh, I have to reassure her, or, oh, I have to make sure I'm not too judgmental, and all this baloney that wouldn't have helped either of us.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a very, very good point. I mean, one of the things that I'm very clear on is I'll call it how I see it. If you're gonna tell me bullshit, I'll tell you bullshit. And I'm not afraid to go there. But if at an earlier point in my life, yeah, like I've got to mind myself. I've got to be careful about how I put this and blah, blah, blah. Now I'm like, I don't care if you like it or not. This is who I am. This is what I believe. And if it aligns with your belief systems, terrific. Or if it gives you something that you can actually use to think about things differently, that's all for the better. But in some ways, I just see myself as a messenger. It's like I got this life experience, not because it was supposed to make me greater. I was given this life experience so that I could help you be
I
greater.
was just going to say, Jacqueline, even though you just said, I'm now showing up because this is just who I am, I would go further than that. I would say you are who you are, but you've also chosen to be in service to humanity, in service to freeing people from that sense of dread about who they are and that their life is going to be like one punishment after the other. And that's what's so beautiful about you. That's why I immediately wanted you on my show, because you are you're tough. You're I would count myself to a large degree when I'm at my best. We are truth tellers. We are messengers, but our messages aren't there to hurt people, shame them, or whatever. It's to strengthen them. And I absolutely love and adore that about you. And I'm so grateful, because you're right. Our country and our world is in a mess. And it's going to take some very powerful people that say it's okay for you to wake up and be who you are, so you can come into your best. And
Yeah.
that's what I see in you. And I would ask you, how would you help people reclaim their power? Because my whole thing is, how do we shift power over and power under to power within and power between? Like, what are some specific things you would tell them? I bet you they're in your book. And if you want to reference your book, Jacqueline, right now, this is also a place.
Yeah, well, I'm working on a new book right now, as you mentioned, Unleash the Power of Fear, and how fear is your greatest ally in life and leadership. The points that I'm making there are, here are the things that fear does to you: perfectionism, procrastination, approval, blame, judgment. All of those types of things are very much fear-based behaviors.
Mhm.
For me to help people to bring out the very best in themselves, they have to be able to see that we are all a patchwork of good and bad, if you want to put the labels good and bad on there. But we're all a patchwork of very different flavors, shall we say.
Mhm.
Many of them we like and many of them we don't like. So when I say to people, what's your greatest fear? And they say, I fear I'm not good enough. And my next question is, good enough for whom?
Mhm.
Because if you're going to be good enough for somebody else, you'll never be good enough for yourself.
Right.
So how do I help you bring out the best in you? Is by helping you to understand that truly bringing out the best in you is being the good enough you.
Mhm.
And it was a big piece for me in my motherhood. If I could just go back a wee bit on this one. There was a psychologist called D.W. Winnicott, who wrote a book called The Good Enough Mother. Now, my mother, left my first child, gave my child up for adoption, left my second child with his father, and then the third one came along, and I had to figure out how to really be a mother to her at the time. And then I had a stepdaughter who came to me from Thailand, a complete stranger at the age of 10. And then I had another one after that. So, there's been 5 children in my life. And I like to say I have a pretty decent relationship with all of them, although the adopted one, that's separate, that's another life. But the point that I'm making here is that the mother process for me was a very troubling situation, and I had to learn how to be a good enough mother, learn how to be a good enough person.
Mhm.
That becomes a really critical issue here. So in my new book, I really give some really clear understanding of what this means to become a good enough person. Now, the one thing I say about the new book is this: I'm taking you on a journey, because really we're all on a hero's journey. If we know anything about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, this is it. We're all on a hero's journey. We're going on a quest, and that quest is to discover who you are. And knowing who you are takes a lot of courage. And that's the other side of fear, is the courage. So when we're looking at becoming the best self, we have to look at what is a good enough self for you.
Yes. It's so powerful what you're saying. I think I got the chills literally, which I love it when that happens, because the deepest wound in all of us is our own belief in our inferiority. I mean,
Mhm.
that's why I study Adler and use Adler psychology. And there's a book about him called The Courage to be Disliked. And what you're really describing in that hero's journey is reclaiming yourself even in the journey and in the learning. One of the things that I love to hold on to is the LifeWork Systems, my company. Our mission statement is to create a world where all people love their lives. And I always add this emphasis: I don't want them to just love their life, I want them to love their life. But you're describing they have to reclaim who they are. They have to look for the good enough and build upon those assets, and not keep focusing on where I'm not good enough, because all
Exactly.
that does
Yeah.
is drag you down. So I think it's the most important thing in this conversation about fear is, are we afraid we are broken, disposable, toxic, bad for the community? All that.
The point around that, Judy, is that's the story you tell yourself about who you are. This is not the truth of who you are.
No.
It's not the truth of who you are. I mean, I watch my 2-year-old granddaughter who's so filled with joy. This child laughs a lot, and she's just so full of herself, and she's always on the move, and she's just got curiosity about everything. We as adults, we've dumbed all of that down, and we've developed this profile of who we think we are with all our flaws and all the ways in which we're not good human beings. But go back to that 2-year-old who just loved life because they were in it. Yes. And if we take that point of view with ourselves, wow, what miracles we could perform. But that inner dialogue, that inner critic voice that says you're not good enough, that you're this, you're that, you're the next thing, the negative self-talk that didn't start with you but started with somebody else, this really becomes the story that you are reinventing, redesigning, refining for yourself, so that you can, at a certain point in your life, you can go, you know what, I am really pretty good. I love myself, and loving yourself is really a big deal of that. We could go a whole conversation on that one alone, but learning how to love yourself, not from the point of view of I'm better than anybody else.
Right. That's not really love.
That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is I love myself because I'm showing up authentically. I'm showing up with what I value. I'm showing up with care, with compassion, and with kindness for others and for self. Because self-compassion is a big piece of this fear issue. You have to learn how to be kind to yourself, even in the moments when you know that you're not being kind to yourself.
So, Jacqueline, it's time for us to wrap up this show, but I want to wrap it up on what you just said. You talked about self-love, and what I hear in this last part in particular that you're saying is that the way to transform fear is to be with who we are in the present moment and choose to see how amazing and loving and beautiful we are for even being here. And that is what is the deepest fear, is the fear of ourselves. And so I just want to acknowledge you for holding the space, for helping people to reclaim who they are, to put down those things that get in the way of that 3-year-old and that 2-year-old that we were capable of becoming, but didn't until we were ready now. And helping them not only have a happy life, but start having really happy relationships because they have a happy relationship with themselves. And Jacqueline, I just acknowledge you, and I invite our listeners to keep listening, because it's people like you that God has given me the blessing of finding and bringing on this show. But more than that, the blessing you are to really create a new world with people like myself who really want to help that world love their lives. And I just want to tell you, I really appreciate that, and invite our listeners to go look at your TED Talk, to go look up your books, and to find you on social media and get your help if they're ready to do that hard work. Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for being here today.
Thank you, Judy. I have loved our conversation. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You've been listening to When Everyone Wins, where we're shifting power over and under to power within and between. I'm Judy Ryan, your transformation talk radio host. Tune in each second and fourth Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time to learn new concepts and tools, and listen to conversations I have with thought leaders and change agents. You'll also see real-world applications of what I'm covering so that you experience the power of the concepts and tools I share. In each episode, I bring you my knowledge from decades in workplace culture transformation and leadership development as the founder and CEO of LifeWork Systems. I invite you to call in with your unique stories and questions. The path to ensure that everyone wins depends on our ability as people to create a life we love and help others do the same. For more information, visit lifeworksystems.com.